haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening. Hello and welcome to Cult Chat. We are really excited to bring to you a guest from America who we've been very much looking forward to speaking with. It's Dr. Steven Hassan. He is a mental health professional and a PhD. He's an expert in undue influence tactics used by authoritarian leaders and destructive cults. He's the author of 4 books, including Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, and The Cult of Trump. He is the founding director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Centre, which provides training, consulting, and support to individuals who are struggling to leave or recover from a cult, and to families and organisations that are concerned about cult behaviours. He developed the BITE model of authoritarian control to identify control tactics in the Influence Continuum model to discern ethical from unethical influence. Dr. Hassan began helping people affected by undue influence after he was deprogrammed from the Moon Cult, the Unification Church, in 1976 at age 22. Dr. Hassan holds a master's degree in counselling psychology from Cambridge College and a doctorate in organisational development and change from Fielding Graduate University School of Leadership Studies. You can find out all about Dr. Hassan's work at freedomofmind.com. Thanks for joining us on the show, Dr. Hassan. It's so lovely to have you with us.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we understand you're also going to be recording and playing us on your own podcast, so we need to let your audience know who we are as well.
We'll be putting it on my YouTube channel, not on my podcast, but
okay.
We have a pretty robust YouTube, and then we'll share it in social media.
Grand. Well, shall we introduce ourselves to you then?
Please.
How about you start, Liz?
Great. Well, we've actually met already because here I'm just putting up a couple of pictures that Kaz and I took with Dr. Hassan when we were at the International Cultic Studies Association conference last year in Barcelona, and we were privileged to have a conversation. In fact, you did a wee little cult chat snippet for us discussing the session that you had just spoken at, and just remember being so thrilled that you were there in person to share of your knowledge. And I'm currently just enjoying those books that I can see sitting in behind your bookcase too. So I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust here in New Zealand, and I'm one of the trio of Cult Chat co-hosts. Am I able, before we get right into the very deep stuff, to do the prize draw that I said we would be doing at the beginning of our episode? Dr. Hassan, we had a bit of fun. We got on our Facebook page, Cult Chat. We asked our followers to guess who we were going to be interviewing at 8 a.m. this morning. Now, we gave them some clues. We said it wasn't the Pope, and it wasn't the Prime Minister, and it wasn't the former leader of Gloriavale. And guess away. And I said the first person to guess correctly, our guest, would receive a book of Theo Pratt's Unveiled, A Story of Surviving Gloriavale. And I just need to announce our winner is Daniel Schricker. And that's amazing because Daniel happens to be a huge follower of ours, and he's in Australia, and he was part of Kwizazu Bantu. And so he has lived experience, he follows, and it's a very similar group to Gloriavale's experience. So we'll be sending that out to you, Daniel. Thanks for joining in. Yes. Over to you, Lindy.
Kia ora and hello. My name is Lindy Jacob, and I run the Olive Leaf Network here in New Zealand, which is a charitable entity that supports former members of high demand religious groups, or those who are current members but who are thinking of leaving. And I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren or the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. So definitely that, life experience is a key motivator for me, knowing just how important this topic is, and that it's not something just for the ivory towers of academia or anything like that. It's not just an interesting discussion to have, but it's really affecting real life people on the ground all around the world all the time. So yeah, that's what motivates me, and it's fantastic to meet you and to be able to discuss this important topic with you today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and as Liz said, we met in Barcelona. I am a GP, a general practitioner, medical doctor here in Christchurch, New Zealand. I've been practicing for 25 plus years. I have a lived experience of being a child at a small cult in New Zealand, in Auckland, in the 1980s called Centrepoint, which was a pretty unsafe place for kids to be. It was a psychotherapy and wellness kind of well-being cult. And I also am a co-host on this show and lead a network of health and social sector professionals here in New Zealand to get increased awareness and understanding of this work and how to upskill and support survivors as well, and a bunch of other stuff. But we're here to talk to you today, not to talk about ourselves. So we'd like to really crack on and learn more about your thoughts, your work, and also this topic that is really kind of tugging at our heartstrings right now about the work of cult apologists. We're trying to really understand it. I recently went to the Montreal conference, Steve, and when we were there, I was with my friend Maria Esquera, who I know you know, Australian psychologist.
Yes.
And and we were a bit alarmed as we were last year about the presence of a fairly high-profile cult apologist or academic who writes very favourably about new religious movements, and that the name of that person was Eileen Barker. And we spoke in one of our previous Cult Chat episodes about that and our discomfort. And then you posted on your own YouTube channel a response to that, which was really sort of heartfelt and strong. And so we thought we'd get you on and would sort of hear more about your thoughts about it, because you have been in this world for a very long time, and we thought we had a lot to learn from you. So shall we just crack in with the interview then?
Let me just say, yes, so I got the program from the Moonies in 1976. And I'll just say, because we're doing the interview a day after my mentor, Robert J. Lifton, passed away at age 99. It was Lifton's seminal work in 1961 called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China, that was utilized in my deprogramming from the Moonies. And it was his 8 criteria that he wrote about in chapter 22 called Ideological Totalism that allowed me, who was absolutely convinced I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed, that wait a minute, this is an Air Force psychiatrist studying what the communist Chinese are doing, and all 8 criteria apply to the Moonies, and it began the wheels that led to my deprogramming. So I just want to acknowledge him and say that I knew Dr. Lifton over 49 years, and I've done a number of interviews on video and blogs about his work. He's written over 30 books. And so I just want to invite your listeners to learn more, because really my work is based on his work. Of course, Margaret Singer, also Lewis West, Edgar Schein. Those were the big 4 names back in the 60s, 70s. But Lifton really changed my life, because I was a ashamed, embarrassed, confused college dropout, ex-Moonie with a cast on my leg from my toes to my groin. And I reached out to him and said I wanted to tell him about my Moonie experiences. And he's like, come and talk to me. And I was describing how the Moonies operated. And he said, I just studied it secondhand, but you've lived it. They did it to you and you did it to other people. And what you're describing is so much more sophisticated than what the Chinese communists did. You need to study psychology and explain it to people like me. And I was
Wow.
sitting there with my cast going, this Yale psychiatrist, he had a wall of hardcover books behind him from ceiling to floor, was telling me I had something to teach him. It was mind blowing in a good way, and it gave me a path because, I was really ashamed and embarrassed and confused. So I said, I can do that. I can deconstruct my experiences and try to figure out the pieces of how they got me because I was not a stupid, uneducated person from a bad family at all. So I just wanted to give a tribute to Dr. Robert Lifton. And then I want to just start out by saying I've been to Australia several times. I've only been to New Zealand once. They were all related to cult work. And I did a 7-day workshop at the University of Queensland that an ex-Jehovah's Witness, Jan Gronville, put together. And I was on Four Corners, and I did a 1-day workshop at Sydney for the Counter Cult group. And I really love being down under. So invite me back. It's a long flight, but it's great. And I've having a relationship with Nigel Denning, a psychologist in Melbourne,
Do you?
because
He's,
his
yeah.
mentor, forensic psychologist Daniel Brown, was my mentor, Daniel Brown. I've had a bunch of great mentors, I should add.
Wow.
I'm not just Lifton, Zimbardo. I've had some really amazing professionals that have said, I'm happy to share my expertise with you. And I love to learn. You want to you want to talk about my addiction? I love to learn. Like I'll
Mhm.
read books, I'll listen to podcasts. I want to broaden my mind. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, so back to your question. So, I guess what I want to say for your listeners is the following frame, and that is we now know factually that big tobacco in the United States knew that smoking cigarettes caused cancer. They suppressed that information for decades because they wanted to make a lot of money. And part of their playbook was to hire experts, quote unquote, who were not experts in medicine or in lung disease, pulmonologists or whatever. They were just people who were propagandists to say the research isn't conclusive, there's no causality. In the meantime, we've since gotten whistleblower information that led to the facts that they knew it was causing grave harm, killing tens of thousands of people every year, and they just wanted to make money. And they're back at it, by the way, with vaping, which is horrible for your lungs, maybe worse than cigarettes. And if you've noticed in movies, everybody's
Yes.
smoking again in movies. They paid it to have that added to movies, by the way. So, like big tobacco did it, big fossil fuel corporations and countries have known since the 1950s that we were contributing to global climate warming and it was going to be deleterious to our environment. And they hired experts to say there's no proof that there's human global warming and we need more research, yada, yada, yada. So, why is Steve going on and on about big tobacco and fossil fuels? Well, my frame is that all the big authoritarian cults are using the same playbook, hiring experts to say there's no such thing as brainwashing. We should never call a group a cult. Let's call them new religious movements and let's not judge. And as we're doing this, let's not interview ex-members or critics or talk to journalists who've done exposés. Let's just keep saying religious freedom, religious freedom. We need religious freedom, and there's no such thing as brainwashing and mind control. And I say, hooey to you. And
Mm.
now I've set the table to talk about Eileen Barker because I was a leader in the Moonies. And when I was a leader in New York, and sociologists said, I want to come to your workshop and study you, we changed the workshop. We knew there was a sociologist coming. So when Eileen Barker said, I went to a workshop and there's no brainwashing and I didn't join, and wrote a book called The Making of a Moonie, I reached out to her. I said, Eileen, I was a leader. They changed the workshop. There is brainwashing. And she's like, no, no, it's not. You know, it's no. I'm butchering her accent, her British accent. But I said, I've studied brainwashing. Yes, they really do. And the long story short is she made her career as a sociologist of religion with many other sociologists of religions saying there's no such thing as brainwashing or mind control. And it's BS. And when I did my doctoral dissertation, part of what you need to do when you're doing your doctorate is a lit review. I was appalled at how many articles and how many books were written by the apologists saying there's no such thing as brainwashing. There was almost nothing written about brainwashing and mind control. There was a very few number of people who were doing peer review journal articles, like for real. So, back in 1980, when was it? 1985, when I decided to get my master's degree in psychology, and I did my master's thesis on how to help people get out of cults non-coercively. It was just, and it still is an unknown field. It's, to this day, there's no university in the world teaching people how to be a clinician and help people in cults. So I did an online course for psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and counselors. It's online that people can take. It's oriented for the United States, and I think there may be a different credentialing system in New Zealand. But the point is that we're really at a point now where we are getting more people like Maria Esquera, who I adore, grew up in a cult and became a psychologist and is now
Mm.
speaking out. Like, I'm like, yeah, we need more people like Maria.
Yes.
Maria, we need more people and yourself, Caroline, professionals who are like, I was there. Let me tell you
Mhm.
how it fits the model, etc.
Mhm.
So that's my initial rant about Eileen Barker. And all I can say is that she's done a huge disservice. She was getting government money in the UK. People were saying, my son is in the Moonies. And she would be like, there's no problem with the Moonies. They don't brainwash people, or Scientology or whatever. And it's like she was not helping. She was not
Mhm.
help. She was harming people. And
Yeah.
so, and I can tell you, I want to tell one other story and then I'll shut up for a few minutes. So I got involved with this forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School about 9, 10 years ago called the Program in Psychiatry and the Law, because I realized that the law is about 100 years out of date. And therefore, understanding about undue influence was limited to children, minors, or elderly people with dementia. And everything else in
Mm.
the middle was a slippery slope. That was the
Interesting.
official view. So I did a presentation on my work, and one of the director of research said, you need to do a doctorate, you need to do a quantitative study. And if you do it, I'll supervise your research. To which I said, I'm too old to get a doctorate. I'm 63. And he said, well, I'm 77. Do you want to change the law or don't you? And I was like, you got me on that one. So I did it. And now
Wow.
we're doing a follow-up study from my dissertation at bitemodel.com. I really want to
Mm.
urge any of your listeners it's a free anonymous survey. We have now 20 questions on a Likert scale. It won't take you that long, and then 40 questions based on my bite model, because we want to do scientific research and write it up in peer-reviewed journal so that there's no slippery slope. The more behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control a group does or a person does, the more authoritarian, or the more it's like trafficking. And that was what my
Mm.
dissertation was based on. So I wanted to add that piece in, is that the last thing in the world destructive cults, especially religious cults, want is a way for governments to say you can't be tax exempt because you're not
Mm.
giving fully informed consent, because you're labor
Mhm.
trafficking your followers, because you're installing phobias, because you're isolating them,
Mhm.
because you're not allowing them to talk to ex-members and critics, because you're shunning. All of these behaviors, if the
Mhm.
law understands this, then it's no longer easy for the cults to get away with all this criminal activity and exploitation.
That's incredible. You've gone to the bite model because, and that, as you said, stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And people can head to your Freedom of Mind website because you've actually got that there for people to be able to walk through, and it's a list of indicators around how controlling the group is. So when I stumbled across your bite model, I was very excited. We'd been working with people leaving Gloriavale. We knew there was something terribly wrong, and I couldn't understand why no one was doing anything. There were lots of newspaper articles, but the government looked like they weren't reading the newspaper and acting. So we decided, myself and another friend, let's fly up to Wellington, have a meeting with the charity services. We'd been emailing them for a number of years about what was going on in the group,
Hmm.
but we didn't seem to be getting any traction for an investigation. There had been one prior, which they just sort of closed out, even though they found there was criminal activity. Don't ask.
Right.
So we go for another reinvestigation, and I take your bite model, and I'm like, look at this. Here's this Dr. Hassan, he's an expert. And I ticked beside it everything that Gloriavale did, and it was pretty heavily ticked. They're a pretty strong authoritarian group.
Right.
They had the audacity to ask me if we'd had a professional assessment done. And I looked at them and said, well, you should be the body organising the professional assessment. You're the government. You've given them charitable status. We've complained for years. Like, where's your psychologist? Why haven't you done it? Well, I'm just a member of the public. Where am I going to get this specialist from? New Zealand had no understanding, really. This is only 5, 6, 7 years ago. Very
Yeah.
little understanding
Yeah,
of cultic
exactly.
harm. And then one of the guys sitting next to me in the charity services meeting, and honestly, there was some behaviour in that meeting. There were man with his arm up behind his head, putting his feet out in front of us two women, doing a bit of the power position, and another one sat there like this, burly next to me, and he said, "Wow," he said, um, I should know about it. I helped when Centrepoint got shut down." And I looked at him and said, "Oh, well, you ought to have known better then." Like, I thought, I'm not going to be intimidated by you. I'm sure they didn't like me after that. And after that, we really catapulted into starting up our trust for Gloriavale leavers. And now we are waiting for, we've had the next charitable investigation. It's taken them 3 years after the court case. And we're just in the moment, I would say, in about 4 or 5 weeks, we hope to hear whether Gloriavale's charitable status has been revoked. And guess what? We never paid for a psychologist to do an assessment on them. All you need is good information from former members, really. But
Great.
we'd like to know when your tool is going to be validated and able to be used in court settings, and what will that look like?
So it's already being used by labor trafficking and sex trafficking experts because it's defined as fraud, force, or coercion. So with that
Wow.
framing, force doesn't mean just punching or hitting or taking a gun out. Force means where the person feels threatened for speaking out or for talking to an ex-member or etc. So it's already being used, but the cults have a lot of money. They hire the most expensive law firms. I've been doing expert witness stuff, and the people representing the ex-members are the Davids, and the Goliaths are all of the cults, and they
Mm-hmm.
try to just find loopholes. So here's the under the hood comment about my study at bitemodel.com. The bite model has been used since 1985. People have read it and left cults, especially the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons are the two biggest ones in the US, because it describes their experience. But the problem from the strictly quantitative point of view is that if you're controlling sleep, you're also that influences your emotions, or it influences your thinking, or it influence. So the variables are interconnected, and I've always said they're interconnected. Human beings are a system, and our thoughts do influence our bodies do influence our emotions, etc. So, and from a strictly a quantitative point of view, I did a very extensive follow-up as a fielding fellow with a data scientist. And he said, Steve, here's 20 questions that pass all of the statistical hoops for clean variables. So what we're trying to do is determine, if you fill out those for your experience at Gloryvale, for example, it will give you a number from, I think it's 0 to 100, or 0 to 10, 10 being authoritarian. It'll give you an 8 or an 8.5 based on where in the pyramid you were, or if were you were a fringe member. That's another variable that we didn't do when I was doing my doctorate. And then we're going to compare it with the bite model, where we've altered some of the descriptions to make them clearer. So you'll get a number for the bite model and you'll get a number for the first one. And we want to know if it's the same number, or if one's higher or lower than the other. And we'll write it up and we'll publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. And hopefully there'll be more researchers who are early in their career who want to take that and apply it to different groups. And if we can get 1,000 ex-Scientologists to do it, then authorities can't say no, they're not trafficking. If 1,000 people show a 9.5 in the Sea Org, for example, this is scientific. So that's what I'm pushing for, aside from my general activism, just to challenge the myths that people have been born and raised about, which is, I'm too smart to be in a cult. Only weak, stupid, gullible people get into cults. Wrong. It's called the myth of invulnerability. Alan Shefflin, the law professor, colleague, friend of mine, talked about that. And people think we're logical, and humans are social and emotional beings. Logic, we rationalize. We're not making decisions consciously. A lot is unconscious heuristics, and that goes to Kahneman's work. So we have to challenge the old models and explain, now we have neuroscience, now we have more advanced social psychology, and let's bring the law to serve justice.
Yes.
So can I chip in?
Sure, please.
Stephen, yeah. You talked it there. We've covered a lot of stuff there, and the thing that's popping into my head is this. First of all, we haven't, I don't think, properly defined what a cult apologist is. So I think we really need to get that there. And another bit that has been mentioned, because you've mentioned listening to survivors, and you've just said 1,000 Scientology survivors, and you've mentioned repeatedly listening to survivors. Yourself, you talked about going to Robert Lifton and saying, this was my experience. And he
listened.
He didn't just listen, he validated the incredible importance of your lived experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what the cult apologists, which we need to define, I would like your definition, what they have said repeatedly is, let's not listen to them, they're biased, they have atrocity stories that are conflated, unrealistic stories. So I'd like to, could we do those two things?
Yes, please.
The definition, and then survivor voices. First, the definition.
So in my second book, it wasn't mentioned because it's out of print at the moment, called Releasing the Bonds, was the first time I spoke publicly. I called them cult defenders in that volume as opposed to apologists. But for me, apologist means that they are rationalizing, justifying, and doing propaganda and doing disinformation in service of authoritarian cults. They're not genuine scholars who are open to learning. Like one of the first things I learned in my doctoral studies is a true scholar studies the arguments of whatever theory it is, looks at the journal articles. We were taught how to evaluate biases and how to evaluate references and all of that. And here's a factual thing. I interviewed Mike Rinder, who wrote a book. He was the former #3 man of Scientology, and he was head of OSA, the Office of Special Affairs, which was their version, the updated version of the Guardian's office, and Scientology's version of the Gestapo, of the Nazis, which were a cult. And Mike Rinder talked about getting this famous sociologist to agree with him, and Scientologists are trained in persuasion and undue influence from their hypnotic sessions for training routines with the eyeballs and everything else, convince this sociologist not to trust ex-members or anyone who writes critical stuff. And he was the first of all these other people, including Melton, now Intravigne in Italy, and Chesner, etc. But it was the beginning of this whole industry of so-called experts who say brainwashing doesn't exist. And many of these people were told, you can come and interview our people. We'll give you the people to interview. You can't just walk randomly up to people, and don't listen to ex-members. I mean, it was literally like that. And a number of these people were like, we will pre-buy the first 10,000 copies of your book that you're going to write about our group. So they're not paying them to write a good thing, but they're paying them. And then people like Eileen, I think she said she went to 12 or 15 or 20 Mooney science conferences where they pay, first class plus honorarium and hotels to go to these conferences, etc. Because the Moonies would then say, see, we're accepted by scholars. See, we're a religion. Right. So the propaganda is the proper framework of cult. What is a cult apologist? It's someone who's not a scholar, but someone who is ideologically predisposed to make excuses and deny all of the factual, criminal, and unethical behavior of these organizations.
Could I just jump in there?
Sure.
I think that, thank you for what you've shared there. And I think the fascinating thing for me with the term cult apologist, I've begun just to do a little bit of research over the years academically, and found it fascinating, when I first started delving into the world of academia in this area, that, similar to what you said, lo and behold, wow, there's very little academic research that uses, for example, the term cult. And that was the first time I was exposed to the reality that the term cult itself is incredibly controversial and really frowned upon in academic circles, and all that kind of, if our listeners want to look up that's a whole nother thing of where the term cult itself. And then I came across the fact that also, because I was trying to meet and talk with some scholars and academics with regard to the exclusive brethren, and I discovered that again, there were some people. I very quickly came up with this thing, as you've referred to, that the stories and experiences and lived experience, the facts, the absolute, stone cold facts that former members had of what life was like on the inside was completely discounted as being a valid source of data or information on the groups. And eventually I came across the term cult apologist. And I, again, was fascinated to see that the term itself is also very contested and controversial, in terms of academia, that they also don't like that term. And so I think that's another interesting thing that we need to hold in mind here. Just like cults themselves refuse to be called cults, these people who some of us may call cult apologist or a cult defendant, they also refuse that term and would not accept it. And some of that is because it is inherently pejorative. It is inherently, it carries, the connotations of things you've said about people potentially being paid, potentially unethical behavior, potentially sometimes more the work of a propagandist or a unethical lawyer, rather than actually genuinely balanced, fair, and ethical academic and scientific research into all sides of the story. It's almost like a friend of mine said to me, it's like people in the wildlife, maybe going to investigate animal life in the wilderness in Africa, and only wanting to interview the lions rather than the zebras as well, and also refusing to interview the termites and the elephants, who also might have had a perspective on some of the attacks that took place. It's sort of like, it does feel like there's a refusal to actually take on board the very valid data of people with lived experience, and it's incomprehensible to me.
So let me just say, because I have that 49-year, probably more than you guys have been alive, perspective.
That is true.
I can say categorically it was the cult apologists that made cults not cool to call a group a cult. It was them.
Yes.
They lobbied the media. They sent lawyers letters. This is an attack on religion by atheists and communists.
Defamatory.
So understand. But it's interesting because these same people wanted everyone to call them new religious movements. But then what do you do with a political cult? It's not a religious movement. Oops, let's not think about that. Whereas
yes, or the fact that some of these religious groups are not new at all. They've been around for several hundred years.
That's another issue, isn't it? But again, we're talking about propaganda, use of words, and trying to do thought-terminating cliches. So my focus of my work is really on authoritarian cults. So my definition of that is a pyramid structured group that uses deception in recruitment and control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to create a pseudo identity that's dependent and obedient on the leader or on the ideology or on the group. So that's how I define that. Now, if you want to talk about other definitions of cult, there are theologians who say anything that doesn't follow the Bible fundamentally is a cult. I don't use that. Caroline?
I'm conscious that we're running out of time, and I'm thinking about like what actually drew us into this conversation now, and that was me going with Maria and last year with Liz to International Cultic Studies Association conference and seeing a cult apologist on headline, and this year in particular knowing that many people, particularly some people I know who have strong, powerful stories, not getting any spot on that program. There are a lot of people who didn't get spots on the program. And yet, I've been to two, and a cult apologist was in. I didn't listen to either talk, but I'm not sure if there was anything very new in either of those two talks. And their propaganda. It's propaganda. We've already established that it's propaganda. We all agree it's propaganda. And for my generation, not your generation, Dr. Hassan, but my generation, to walk into a room at a conference like that, which is so valuable, I'm absolutely behind the work they do. I've met some extraordinary people. Both conferences I've been to, I did a huge amount of work to advocate for the value of that conference. So I'm behind them. Yet it irks extraordinarily that this person who is saying survivor voices don't matter, that we need to have neutrality when we talk about cults, that they're not cults, that they're not harmful. Those kind of ideas, I'm not actually quoting her, but those are the general ideas that come through that we've established is there. And so the second generation who have not been heard enough, whose voices have not been raised enough, there's this one event per year that we can go to meet with scholars, and there's this person there who makes us feel extraordinarily unsafe. So it's a problem. It's a real problem. I guess I'm wondering what, you're feeling about.
Let me share my historical perspective, and let me say that Michael Langoni was the director for most of what was started out as the American Family Foundation. Then they changed their name to the International Cultic Studies Association. So when Barker was given a Lifetime Achievement Award, it was under his aegis, not Jackie Johnston or the current board that I'm aware of. But here's my take. So again, it's about understanding the history. And from 1976 on, there were these parental groups in the United States whose kids got into cults or ex-members, and they would start organizing locally to warn other people. And it morphed into a national organization called the Cult Awareness Network. And they would have an annual conference. And I should also say that when I first got deprogrammed, it was involuntary for the first day. Then I agreed because I wanted to prove to my parents I wasn't in a cult. So I agreed to be there for the rest of the time that I agreed to. But there was a real effort back in the 76 period of time to do forcible deprogrammings, and especially with court-ordered conservatorships. And judges were being approached by parents with ex-members and a therapist saying, Your Honor, we believe our adult child has been the victim of artful and designing people. We would like 1 week custody to expose our loved one to information. And it worked. It was like 90% successful at helping people get out. Well, the cults freaked out about that, lobbied all the mainline religions, said, if you don't back us on this, they're coming after you next. So then it got outlawed as an option, a legal option for parents to rescue a loved one. And so the wars continued, and the Cult Awareness Network. So I did deprogramming for a year. I did about 12 cases, and then I went back to college. But I'm still tarred that I'm a kidnapped deprogrammer, even though I never kidnapped anyone or held anyone against their will. The cults manufactured this information. You can see this on Scientology websites, and other cults still say this about me. But what I'm trying to get to, Caroline, is that in 1996, the Cult Awareness Network was sued into bankruptcy by Scientology because of a case by Rick Ross doing an involuntary case. The cults went after them, sued them. They fell apart. AFF, which turned into ICSA, was designed by the founder who gave the money, Kay Barney, whose daughter was in the Moonies, to be a professional organization, whereas the Cult Awareness Network was the grassroots organization. And because they were sued into bankruptcy and were put out of business, and they wound up buying CAN's name, logo, and phone number, and getting all their records of all of the people who called them for help. Scientology got that.
Yeah.
AFF and ICSA freaked out, and they're like, we don't want to get sued. We didn't want them coming after us. And so the ideology at that time was, let's invite them to speak. Let's be open so they can't accuse us, because part of what they went after with CAN was membership. Scientologists by the score wanted membership, and CAN board said, nope, you can't join. It would be too threatening to our members. So that's the history, I believe, of them saying, let's open our doors wide. Let's be open to hearing all kinds of perspectives. And I was very, very upset about this, especially when Eileen Barker, who made her career saying I was a liar, that the Moonies don't do brainwashing. And then the London Daily Mail was sued by the Moonies for two articles saying they brainwashed people and separated people from their family. And they lost a $2 million lawsuit in the UK. But nevertheless, to get to the point of why might they be allowing this to take place, that's one of my
That might.
guesses, is it's
Mm,
political. And honestly, I didn't attend Montreal. I did go to Barcelona. I did go to Louisville the year before. I was wanting to give the new board a chance to clean house after Michael Langone. But at a certain point, I just said, I don't want to add my name and bring people to pay to register, to go to, as much as I wanted to see you and see Maria and see my friends and colleagues. I don't want to give my support to a group that doesn't, and understand, I wrote the book, The Cult of Trump. Would they review the book, The Cult of Trump? Would they want me to give a talk about the cult of Trump? Michael Langone said, no, 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 you can't. It's not a cult anyway, Steve. This is the head of ICSA saying it's not a cult, Steve. To which
mm.
Alan Shefflin, when he was alive and was on the board, said, you can't make that argument because the evidence is overwhelming, Michael.
Mm. It's a
That's my
helpful, that's a
that's
helpful
my
response.
perspective.
Yeah, thank you.
It is. Thanks. I've got one final question as we're heading into wrap up, and then we'll see if there's something else that you would like to say. The only thing that springs to my mind constantly when I think about cult defenders and a cult apologist is the question why. And I just wonder if you're willing to do a nod or a yes. I've got a series of 3 or 4 questions. What is motivating a cult apologist? Are they truly defenders of religious freedom? Do we think that is that a possibility?
So I have to, I need to say, because I've been doing so many cases for so many decades with Jewish cults, Christian cults, and Muslim cults, I always
Mm,
like to go to the Garden of Eden story with any of them. However you want to understand the story,
mm.
Almighty God did not brainwash Adam and Eve to be obedient. So my point is that if you want to have freedom of religion, you need to have freedom of mind. You need to have freedom
Mhm,
of choice. You need to have
mhm.
freedom of conscience. And if
Yeah.
you don't have that choice, then it's coercion.
Mm,
So
mm,
is it possible, that it's about religious freedom? No, I don't. I think a lot of bad criminals call themselves religions because they can get away with stuff and not be held
mm,
accountable. Whereas if they were
mm.
selling used cars and lying about how many miles was on it, they go to jail for fraud.
I agree. So, cult apologists, intellectual cheerleaders who are blinded by utopian fantasies.
I wouldn't be that positive. I don't,
Yeah,
if they were
career interest.
sincere, they would look at the evidence. If you're the thing that's beautiful about the scientific method is there's no truth in science. You have hypotheses and you test out the hypotheses and you abandon the hypotheses if there's a better hypothesis. And it's a community effort. It's not just a single person saying, I have the evidence. It has to be tested. And so the beautiful thing about the scientific method is we do the best we can to offer a framework for evaluating, and we're open to hearing other points of view and refining and
Mm.
testing and abandoning if there's something better.
Right. So, do you think cult apologists then are motivated more? Is it career advancement? Is it financial opportunity? I'm thinking of lawyers as well who defend cult cases. What's the motivation
I
for an
can't
Eileen
speak.
Barker? Why would you?
I can't speak to, groups of people, but um, you're young in the career and somebody says, "Hey, go to study under this person or that person." And so people can get into ideological silos. And I honestly think that more of these so-called scholars need to hear from former members, not just
Right.
calling them names, but just saying, do you have a conscience? Are you really
Yeah.
committed to learning and science and the scientific method? What do you think of this phenomenon or
Mm.
that phenomenon? And because that's what I say about people in the cult of Trump. It's like, stop trying to argue or persuade them with logic or facts, but be warm and ask them with curiosity questions that provoke them to reality test, to think for themselves. Like, how do they make sense of Donald Trump threatening the GOP that if they sign on to releasing the Epstein files, he'll consider it a hostile act? And how do you feel about that compared to when you voted for him and he said he was going to abolish the deep state and reveal the Epstein files? Like, what do you do
Mm.
with those two things? And just
Mm.
wait and let them think about it and wait for a response.
Yeah. I like what you said about ideological silos, and perhaps this is a quote we can end on. Your mentor, Robert Lifton, who's just passed away this week, he wrote in one of his articles, what we choose to study as scholars is a reflection of our advocacies, our passions, spoken or otherwise. And I just wonder about the cult apologists. They're studying in this ideological silo, but it's a reflection of their advocacies. I'm just so interested in why they have an interest in defending cults, authoritarian cults, destroy people, harmful. What are their ideas are not inherently untrustworthy, telling embellished atrocity tales, as was listed. Kenton Swanson did some work on this. That's outrageous. They talked about these groups calling them sensationalized and manipulative, and that former members, were lying. Were actually, when they did a bit of research on it, they found that really current members lied an awful lot. The
Right,
reality when they tested it was that
right.
the current members lied. I just, yeah, I cannot. Like you talked about them having a conscience. I don't know how they sleep at night. I don't know how the lawyers who are defending Gloria Vale, case after case after case, sleep at night. I don't understand it.
My experience with lawyers, because I've been having more and more experiences with cult lawyers, is the money is huge and they rationalize even criminals have a right to the best defense that we can offer them. So I'm just doing what my training
Mm,
gave me to do. And that's where I have a real need to say, look at the influence continuum, because we need morality, we need ethics and values. Let's go back to the
Mm,
golden rule. Let's not do to others what we don't want done to ourselves. Let's look at the young woman who's raped by a billionaire and say, would you want that for your daughter? If you don't, then why is it okay for this guy to do it? Because he's a billionaire and he'll pay you a
mm,
fortune to defend him. So this is where, we really need to come back to values and virtues. And I really believe that most people are good. There's a small percentage of malignant narcissists. I wrote chapter 3 of The Cult of Trump, comparing Trump with Jim Jones and Hubbard and Moon, my former cult leader. It's a stereotypical profile. They don't have
mm,
empathy. They really have a hole in their sense of
mm,
self that they're trying to fill with narcissistic supply. And
mm,
they
mm,
have a
mm,
mental illness. They need
mm.
love. I hate to sound
Oh,
trite. They
mm.
really need
No,
to
love.
feel self-love and be loved by somebody.
And
But
that's probably a great way to end, because we always like to end on a positive note, don't we, Kez?
Yeah,
yes,
love is stronger than mind control. I tell that to all my
absolutely.
clients who are trying to rescue a loved one. And just because you left a cult and they were told never to talk to you again doesn't mean you can't reach out to them and say, I miss you and
Indeed.
I love you and I'm here when you're
Mm,
ready, and here's
mm.
ways to confidentially contact me and no one will know. Just you can, and we'll talk.
Thank you so much for your wisdom and for your ability to really kind of bring that history in, that you're right. We weren't born during these times that you're describing, and that history really helps me. So thank you very much for that and your succinct descriptions of these things.
And thank you for doing the work that you're doing, and it keeps me going, because this is what makes, I don't want people to ignore what I think is the number one topic on Earth, which is undue influence. how authoritarians want to enslave all the populations for their power and money and sexual gratification.
Yes. Well,
Thank you.
Been so helpful. Thank you. So just to our listeners, we've had an excellent time here with Dr. Steven Hassan. We're so grateful for his expertise. Really interesting conversation about, challenging the cult apologists in many ways. And if you would like to know more about the work of Dr. Hassan, head to his website, freedomofmind.com. You'll find the bite model and the influence continuum, which we didn't get to talk about today. But I suggest our listeners stick around for part 2, where Kaz, Lindy and myself, we're going to have a discussion and a dissection of the ideas and concepts we've talked about here with you, because there is a lot more to say on this topic. So thanks to our listeners, thanks to Plains Media for giving us the opportunity to be across the airwaves of New Zealand. Head to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and join us again for another day. Thanks again.
Thank you. Take care.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.